The horrific story of the kidnapped Barbara Jane Mackle was discussed in many media outlets. At that time, no one believed that the 20-year-old girl would be found, but a miracle happened, and she returned home safe and sound. It is no secret that many famous people prefer not to advertise their personal lives. They hide their family status and try not to show their children. In their opinion, such measures will protect their loved ones from terrible tragedies, like the one that once happened to the Mackle family. December 1968, 20-year-old Barbara Jane Mackle was counting down the days until Christmas. She was the daughter of Miami millionaire Robert Mackle, and therefore could afford what was unavailable to many of her peers. Her father made his fortune in one of the largest construction companies in the United States, which he founded. Of course, he had many connections and even personally knew Richard Nixon, who was president at the time. Barbara understood that all roads to a comfortable life were practically open to her, in which there was no need to work. But nevertheless, she understood that it would be wrong to waste her father's money. Instead of expensive clothes and expensive trinkets, she focused on education. Barbara studied at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. The girl dressed rather modestly, and therefore it was impossible to recognize the daughter of a millionaire at first glance. On New Year's Eve, the Hong Kong flu epidemic reached her educational institution. At that time, it had already taken almost 1 million lives. Barbara did not manage to protect herself from it either. She almost immediately fell ill with a sore throat and a high fever. Her mother, Jane Mackle, immediately left the family estate in Florida to pick up her daughter from the dormitory. The woman rented a room at the Rodeway Inn motel a few miles from campus and began to take care of Barbara so that she could get back on her feet as soon as possible. But, as it turned out, this decision was a fatal mistake. On the night of December 17th, someone knocked on the women's room. They opened the door and saw a man in a police cap and a woman in a black mask. The stranger said that the girl's close friend had been in a serious accident and asked her and her mother to come to him at the hospital. As evidence, the unknown people even named the color and make of his car. But neither of the women was given time to think about their decision. The strangers quickly burst into their room. The man pointed a gun at the mother and daughter, and then, having chloroformed Jane, took Barbara outside, put her in a car and quickly drove away with his partner and the victim in an unknown direction. The mother of the kidnapped girl managed to come to her senses only the next morning. She remembered what had happened the day before and immediately called the police. The woman's words were not immediately understood on the other end of the line, since her description of what had happened was interrupted every now and then by her tearful pleas for help. Barbara's friend, who had allegedly been in an accident, soon learned of what had happened. He tried to calm the inconsolable Jane and promised to provide any assistance in the search. When the girl's father, Robert Mackle, learned of what had happened, he immediately flew out of Miami and was there a few hours later. The man connected his connections, and the best investigators, headed by Edgar Hoover, who at that time held the post of FBI director, took up the case. Right in the room of the ill-fated motel, the Bureau's agents interrogated Woodward, who suggested that Barbara had been kidnapped for ransom, since at the university, although she tried not to stand out, she was still very popular. Some envied her, others hated her, others dreamed of becoming friends with her, but everyone knew about her origin. An agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation considered the version of kidnapping for ransom to be the most probable. Later, it was finally confirmed. That same morning, a phone call rang at Mackle's parents' house. At that time, the only person in the room was a friend of their family, who picked up the phone. The stranger said that something was buried on Barbara's family property, but he did not specify what exactly. The man reported the information he had received to the police, and they immediately began to study the specified area. There they managed to find a small measuring cup with a note attached, which contained instructions for the ransom demand for the kidnapped girl. On a small piece of paper, the criminals said that Barbara was buried alive underground, but her coffin contained air and water reserves that would last exactly 5 days. That was how much time the bandits gave the girl's father to think it over. In exchange for her location, they asked for $500,000. Robert Mackle was to agree to the deal by placing an ad in the Miami Herald. On December 18th, the newspaper ran the following note: "Please come home, sweetheart. We'll pay all expenses. Your family." Early in the morning of December 19th, the kidnappers called Mackle's house and gave the address of the place where Barbara's parents were supposed to leave the money. It was located literally 10 kilometers from the family home, In addition, Robert was supposed to put on a noticeable suit and come to the place completely alone. The man did everything according to the instructions. He left a suitcase with bills and drove away without looking back. Then it seemed that now the bandits would report Barbara's whereabouts, and the terrible tragedy would finally have a happy ending. But information about the ransom accidentally leaked to the police. FBI agents did not coordinate their actions with the police, and they tried to detain the kidnapper at the place where Mackle left the suitcase. The criminals managed to escape, but they abandoned their car, in which they planned to leave nearby out of fear. This story frightened the parents of the kidnapped girl. They began to worrying that the criminals might think that they could not be trusted, since Robert and Jane were cooperating with the police. That is why Barbara's father had only one thing left to do: prove to the bandits that he could be completely relied upon. This was the only way he saw his daughter's salvation. The abandoned car became evidence that allowed them to get to the criminals. In the glove compartment of the Volvo let Ruth Eastmanshire's passport, a photo of Barbara holding a sign that said kidnapped, a collection of intimate Polaroid photos of Eastmanshire and Gary Christ, as well as a checkbook and other documents that pointed to the identities of the criminals. The FBI immediately began looking for information about the kidnappers. At that moment, it turned out that Gary Christ already had an impressive list of crimes behind him. The 23-year-old man had committed countless thefts, repeatedly stole cars, and even once managed to escape from prison. He proudly called himself the Einstein of the criminal world because Christ had been thinking for a long time about an absolutely brilliant idea, in his opinion, of kidnapping a rich heir for ransom. The bandit decided that it was too difficult with children because they could scream loudly and easily escape, but it was much easier to intimidate a young girl and bury her. In 1968, Christ moved his family, wife, and two children to Florida from Boston, and he got a job at the Miami Marine Research Institute. There he met 26-year-old student Ruth Eastmanshire. A spark immediately ran between them, and the young people began a stormy romance. Gary almost immediately told his wife that he was now with another. The young people quickly moved in together, and one evening the man confessed to the girl that he was an escaped prisoner. This information did not frighten her, as did the plan that Christ had been hatching for some time. Ruth agreed to participate in the kidnapping, and the two began to prepare and implement the terrible plan. The criminals spent several weeks in the Miami City Library looking through local newspapers and gossip columns in search of a suitable victim. At some point, the name of Barbara Jane Mackle, an ideal rich victim, caught their attention. Then Ruth and Gary thought out a plan for the kidnapping. It was not profitable for them to kill the girl, since they both faced the death penalty for this. After much deliberation, they decided to hide Barbara in a wooden box and bury her underground. The lovers knocked together a coffin measuring 2 meters by 90 centimeters from plywood. Inside, they lined it with fiberglass and also equipped it with a fan and a lamp that were powered by electricity. To prevent the victim from starving to death, they put water and sandwiches in the box, and also equipped her with 2 movable plastic tubes that came to the surface. Thanks to the latter, the girl could breathe. Having assembled the coffin in Florida, the pair of criminals transported it to Atlanta, buried it in the woods, and on December 17th, placed Barbara in it. After the first ransom attempt had essentially failed, Robert Mackle decided to discuss the incident with the FBI agents. He then decided to give a statement to the newspaper that he had nothing to do with the actions of the Miami police, and also asked the kidnappers to give him another chance to bring his daughter home alive. Almost immediately, these words spread across many other media outlets, including TV and radio stations. Late in the evening of December 19th, the Mackle family home rang. This time, Robert answered. He heard a voice calmly giving new instructions. The criminal named another place to transfer the money, which was on the outskirts of the city. The man accepted the information, and the FBI informed the police that they should not take any action. That night, the businessman again paid $500,000 in $20 bills, as the kidnappers asked, and then disappeared. The next day, the FBI received an anonymous call from a stranger who claimed to know the whereabouts of Barbara Mackle. According to him, she was buried alive in the woods 38 kilometers from the abduction site. More than 100 FBI agents were sent to rescue the girl from underground captivity. They scattered throughout the area to find Barbara as quickly as possible. They decided not to inform the girl's parents about the operation yet, so as not to disturb them once again. A few hours later, one of the agents shouted, "Everyone, I think I found something." When their colleagues ran up to the man, they found a plastic tube sticking out of the ground. They began to quickly dig the ground with shovels and hands until they came across a box. The agents called Barbara, but there was no answer. All this seriously scared them. Are they too late? But a few minutes later, the FBI heard a barely audible, weak knock. Opening the lid of the homemade coffin, the men found an exhausted and pale Barbara, who, despite the monstrous situation, tried to smile. After the rescue operation, FBI Director Hoover personally called Robert Mackle with the good news. "We found your daughter. She's alive." At this time, the criminals were planning a retreat. Christ and Iceman Shear decided to split up. He was going to buy a boat and sail to Mexico on it, and she was supposed to go there by land. However, here they again faced failure. Gary really did buy a boat, for which he paid with $20 bills. At that time, the entire United States knew about the form in which Mackle's parents paid the ransom to the kidnappers. The owner of the boat immediately reported the incident to the police, and the bandit was quickly detained. His partner was then caught and arrested. The court sentenced Christ to life imprisonment, but after 10 years he was released on parole. After his release, it seemed that the man was really going to start a new life. He received a medical degree and wanted to build a career as a doctor. But as soon as employers found out about his criminal past, Gary was immediately rejected. Eventually, Christ returned to crime, and in 2006, he was caught on a boat with drugs and illegal immigrants. Then he went to jail again, but in November 2010, he was released. What happened to him after that is still unknown. Ruth Iceman Shear was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but she was released on parole after 4 years. After her release, the woman returned to her native Honduras, met a new love, got married and gave birth to 4 children. After Barbara was kidnapped, the perpetrators clearly explained to her the purpose of this and gave her instructions on how to temporarily stay in a coffin. At some point, she began to have hysterics because she understood that they were going to bury her alive. However, the tears of the 20-year-old rich heiress did not stop the criminals. They forcibly pushed her into the box and closed the lid. According to Barbara, she tried to get out of there several times. She beat the lid with her hands and feet, but all in vain. Having calmed down, she looked around and found instructions for using the coffin and a note that read, "Don't worry. You are safe. You will be home by Christmas one way or another." The criminals assured the victim that she would be able to survive in the box for at least 11 days, while they gave her parents a deadline of 5 days. However, the invention failed after just a few hours, and Barbara was left in complete darkness, in which she spent 83 hours. In her book 83 Hours Before Dawn, she said that calmness and positive thinking helped her survive at that time. She imagined how she would celebrate the holiday with her family, help her mother decorate the tree and wrap presents, and quietly sang Christmas carols. When Barbara finally returned home, her parents did everything to make her feel the cherished safety and comfort. All the guests invited to the party noted that the girl looked calm and happy. Fortunately, the terrible tragedy had almost no effect on her health. In 1971, Barbara married her friend Stuart Woodward, who helped in the search for her. In their marriage, 2 children were born. The couple lived together for 42 years until the man passed away in 2013.